turn to where we left off. In Numbers chapter 16. We've been focusing on God as our judge. He is the judge of the whole world, of every single person. Every single person will stand before him in judgment, his own and those who don't know him as well. When you think of a judge, well, first of all, do we consider judges necessary in our country? Do we consider judges necessary?
Yes.
As very important and a very important duty to carry out. So even just thinking on a human level of our judges, what characteristics come to the forefront of your mind that they have to have, or certainly that they should have if they're going to do their job well?
They must know the law.
What?
They must know the law.
Okay, they got to have a knowledge of the law.
Must
That's,
value truth.
What's that?
They must value truth
Value truth
and life.
and
Life.
life. What else?
Integrity.
Mm-hmm. Do you want them to be loving?
Define the word. Define the word.
Well, that is almost impossible to do, but yeah, do you? Well, I don't know. How would you define love?
Everybody wants a merciful judge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part
Merciful
of his
judge,
love.
yes.
Okay, so should
It is
a judge be? Is it necessary for a judge to be merciful?
Yes,
Yes, so they
Yes.
have to have an element of discernment too, to apply that mercy.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
A lot of discernment to be able to figure out what the truth is, and not just as it appears.
Or
You
what's
know.
been within the parameters presented before them.
Exactly. I mean, that's what Solomon asked for. What? He asked for understanding to be able to judge righteously, and so to understand what the truth is and to get to the underlying issues, to get really down to the heart of it. That discernment is absolutely necessary. So we want a judge to love mercy and to do what?
To do justly.
And to do justly. And what? And to walk humbly. Because if a judge is proud, he's not gonna do mercy or love mercy and do justly. You know, if he is a proud man. And so what else? Do you want them to be consistent? Do you want them to be dependable? You don't want them, judging righteously one day and then, being a terrible mess or being angry the next day, and so they take it out on, they're having a fight with their wife at home, or whichever it is, whether it's a male or female judge, whatever, they're having a fight with their spouse, and they come in and they are upset, and so they hand down harsh judgments all that day or all that week. We don't want to judge like that. You want somebody who is consistent. You want somebody who is dependable. Somebody who, has integrity and is is virtuous, because not only do you want them to know the law, but you want them to carry it out. You want them to not just know the law of the land, but you want them to know moral law as well. You want them to know, ideally, we want them to know God's law, which of course is, all of that is meant to be tied in together. And so, when you start picking apart the law in order to be able to do the things or to bring down the judgments that you want to, then obviously you're no longer being a righteous judge. What else? Decisive. You will not only figure out, but be willing to carry out and hand out the sentence. So being able to determine from those facts and be able to make a judgment and carry it out. What else?
It seems like as we're talking, I think they need to have the ability to come apart for, like, if you will, not apart, but put aside and I don't know what judges do. Do they reread the law and go over what it is, if the case is before them about whatever, do they read the law? Kind of like how when we spend time in the Word, it's like refreshing, it gives a perspective, and then we can, go out and do whatever. I'm wondering if that's an element for them, that they sit down, they go over the laws that they're going to be, they don't have them at their hand, so that they're pushing other things out of their mind and they're able to go forward with what they've put in.
Yeah. You want them to be attentive to the issues that are really at hand. You don't want them to just be distracted or just, be bringing in all kinds of, like Ann was saying, laws that don't matter. In this particular case, you want them to be able to, in that sense, remove themselves and just look at the issues at hand here. What else? We see it on a lot. Do you want them to be creative?
That was Chicken Eddie.
Mm-hmm.
You want them to be creative because you want them to not only give a righteous judgment, but you want them to be considerate of the person that the judgment would help them. And there are obviously a multitude of ways that you can do that. And yes, you can't make the person receive your intent, but you can be creative in the way that you carry out the sentence toward them or determine what the sentence is. I mean, when we want them to be discerning, we want them to be dependable. Do we want them to be tolerant? Do we want them to demonstrate tolerance? Do we know what tolerance is? What's the opposite of tolerance?
Intolerance.
Yeah, that's always the easy. In or on, yes, that's always the easy. The opposite of tolerance is prejudice. So do you want a judge to be prejudiced? No, you don't want a judge to be prejudiced. You want them to be tolerant. Not in the way that it's used today.
Right.
But you want them to demonstrate tolerance. We want them to be attentive. We want them to be truthful and to seek out the truth. We want them to be sincere. We want them to be... Do you want a judge to be forgiving? Is there a time to be forgiving? Are we happy when we were speeding and the policeman is our judge right at the moment and he forgives us at that moment? Is there a place for judges to be forgiving? Certainly.
That's what probation is.
Well, again, that's a creative sentence in the sense of helping them, giving them opportunity, showing mercy and hoping that they will receive it, that they will appreciate what you're doing for them. in that probation, depending on whatever all the details are about that. And so we want them to be persuasive. We want them to be loving. We want them to be wise. We want them to be creative. Is there anything wrong with a judge being enthusiastic? We kind of tend to think of them as just solemn and but he or she should want to bring good unto that person if it's at all possible, because you're not only considering that person, but you're considering everyone around them in the judgment. And so we don't necessarily see it this way, but literally, if you pull out, the point that I'm getting at is that if you pull out the list of the character qualities, you literally, ideally, the perfect judge is going to be demonstrating all of those qualities all the time in his or her judgment. And in this case, of course, we're talking about God. So when he judges, he is demonstrating perfect love. He's demonstrating perfect love. He wouldn't be loving. He wouldn't be perfectly loving if he wasn't judging and judging righteously. And so we don't understand the fullness of God's perfect love if we negate the fact that he is our judge and the judge of all. And so it's that way with any of the names of God or any of the positions that he carries out. And so we want him to be compassionate. We want him to be sensitive. We want him to be self-controlled and meek and gentle. And you can do all those things and judge righteously. You are judging righteously by doing all of those things at the same time. So he does justly. He loves mercy. He is eternally humble. He loves a judge. You want a judge to love righteousness and hate sin. You want him to rejoice not in iniquity, but to rejoice in the truth. You want him to bear all things, believe with all things. You want him to hope in all things. You want him to endure all things, because love never fails. And so love is going to carry out that perfect, that righteous judgment. Before we dive into Numbers there, turn to 1 John. Hold your finger in Numbers and turn to 1 John. Chapter 4. And I just want to read a few verses here, starting at verse 7 of 1 John chapter 3. I'm sorry, chapter 4, verse 7. All right, 1 John chapter 4, verse 7 says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. In this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. Herein is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation, the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another." Let's just skip down to verse 17. It says, "Herein is our love made perfect, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us. If a man say, I love God, and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen? And this commandment have we from him, that he who loveth God love his brother also. Herein is our love made perfect, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment. That thought just astounded me this week. To think that God intends for us to have boldness in the day of judgment. It seems, doesn't it seem almost like an impossibility when you think about it? But that's why he's demonstrating his love for us. That's why he's opening up our knowledge of him. That's why he's gracing us with the desire and the power to do of his good pleasure, to know what pleases him, and to see him in all of his fullness. And that's what we've been looking at more and more and more. And perfect love casts out fear, because fear of torment, that's fear of what? That's fear of man. That's fear of loss, that's fear of death, that's fear of any of what we would consider a negative fear, a fear that is motivated from Satan. But perfect love instills the fear of the Lord, the fear of God, enables us to submit ourselves one to another in the fear of God, enables us to learn the fear of the Lord. And that's on our way back. Thoughts about that. On our way back,
I think a healthy fear. You have to qualify fear, because fear can be your enemy, but it can also be your friend.
Absolutely. The fear of the Lord is your friend. And the fear of anything else is not. And so important that we learn the fear of the Lord, and understanding him as our judge, and that we are all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ, and that a day of judgment, the day of the Lord, is coming, and a day of judgment when we will all stand before him. So to learn the fear of the Lord. And so how do we learn the fear of the Lord? On our way back to Numbers, stop at Proverbs chapter 2. Some of you probably knew where I was going, but Proverbs chapter 2. Says, "My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding," these are things that we just got done mentioning, "yea, if thou criest after knowledge and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver and searchest for her as for hid treasures, then" what are you going to understand? You're going to understand the fear of the Lord. And you're going to, what else? You're going to find the knowledge of God. You're going to grow in the knowledge of him. That's what we want to do. We want to know him, and we want to know his resurrection power and the fellowship of his sufferings. We want to be made conformable unto his death. We want to know him. That's what life is all about. And this is life eternal, to know God and Jesus Christ. And so when we know him, we know life. We know love. And so he wants us to understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord giveth wisdom. Out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. So where are you going to find it? You're going to find it in him. He's the one that lays up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is the one that is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. He's the one that keepeth the paths of judgment and preserves our way. Preserves us in our way. And then what are we going to understand? We're going to understand righteousness, and we're going to understand what? Judgment. And we're going to understand equity. We're going to understand every good path. Every good path. He has blessed us. He is the one. He is the blesser, and he is the one that has blessed us with all spiritual blessings. And he wants us to understand every good path. and enjoy every good path. When wisdom enters into our heart and knowledge is pleasant under our soul, then discretion shall preserve us, and understanding shall keep us, to deliver us from the ways of the evil man and from the ways of the evil woman. And then in verse 20 it says that thou mayest walk in the way of good, that you may walk in the good way, and keep the paths of the righteous, that you might walk righteously. For the upright shall dwell in the land, and the perfect shall remain in it. The upright shall dwell in the land. Again, the ones who are living out their righteousness, which is the righteousness of God in them. And so, but the wicked shall be cut off from the earth, and transgressors shall be rooted out of it. God is going to judge all one day to that end. So now, back to chapter 16 in Numbers, where we left off. Anybody want to sum up what we covered? I think we left off around in verse 34, 35. But well, I'm going to just start reading. Anybody want to try to condense what we covered so far with them? Well, let's just scan through it quickly. We'll begin at the beginning of chapter 16. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, and the sons of Eliab, and On, and the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250, and they decided what? They decided to bring themselves against to rise up against Moses and against Aaron. I'm just going to, you just keep scanning with me, saying, you two are taking too much upon you. We're all holy, and we all should have a part in all this. And so when Moses heard it, he falls on his face, and then he tells them what? He tells them to bring censers, all 250 of them, and Korah as well, and that he would put them before the Lord, and the Lord would choose. And so they, let's see.
Number 21, separate yourself from among congregation that I may consume them.
Yeah, so Moses ends up going out to the two that wouldn't come, and tells the whole congregation, get away from their dwellings. And he says, basically, this is going to be the proof as to the fact that God has chosen myself and Aaron. And this is going to be the proof. If they die the common death, then I know it's probably looks weird. But anyhow, if they die the common death, then God hasn't sent me and hasn't chose Aaron and myself, and so then everybody removes from them, and God opens up the earth as Moses stated was going to happen, and in proof of God's calling upon him, and so we're leaving out a bunch of things, but that's okay. And so it says in verse 31, and it came to pass when he made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them, and the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men unto Korah, and all their goods. They and all that appertained unto them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished among the congregation. And all Israel that was round about them fled at the cry of them, for they said, lest the earth also swallow us up. And there came out a fire from the Lord. This is now this is now an additional happening. So you've got all, it doesn't tell us how many that have been swallowed by the earth, by God opening up the earth. And then a fire comes out from the Lord and consumes the 250 men that rose up with Korah, that had brought their censers and the incense in them before the Lord. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest, that he take up the censers out of the burning, and scatter thou the fire yonder, for they are hallowed. And this is interesting. This is so interesting. And to me, well, I'll read on before I say any more. The censers of these sinners against their own souls, let them make them broad plates for a covering of the altar. For they offered them before the Lord. Therefore they are hallowed. And they shall be a sign unto the children of Israel. And Eleazar the priest took the brazen censers that they offered this in, wherewith they that were burnt had offered, and they, I can't read this morning, and they were made broad plates for a covering of the altar, to be a memorial unto the children of Israel, that no stranger which is not of the seed of Aaron come near to offer incense before the Lord, that he be not as Korah and his company, as the Lord said to him by the hand of Moses. So, thoughts on that?
Number one, it's kind of gross that they went amongst the dead bodies and picked up the censers. That's kind of creepy and weird, picking them up. And then just that whole statement, for they offered them before the Lord, therefore they are hallowed. What the application of that, I'd like to know what people's thoughts are, because just they were in sin, but yet because it was brought before the Lord, these censers were considered hallowed.
Thoughts?
What does that mean?
I'm just kind of thinking about the woman with the issue of blood and others that Jesus healed. Was that generally when the corrupt touches something, it becomes corrupt. But in this case, when God touches something, it becomes holy. That's what I was just thinking about in a very broad sense.
Anybody else?
These priests, these 250 guys,
Nope.
they weren't,
Just guys.
but yet they had incense.
That's what the Lord told him. He told them to bring censers and bring that incense before the Lord. I think when we read it, I think they were of the tribe of Levi,
Right.
but not of Aaron's line.
Levi, yeah.
And Aaron was
Yeah.
chosen out of the tribe of Levi. The whole tribe weren't priests, but Aaron was
they
of the
could have
tribe of
been.
Levi.
Verse 8, and Moses said unto Korah, Hear, I pray you, ye sons of Levi.
Right.
But not sons of Aaron. Aaron was from the tribe of Levi, and his sons were given the priestly duties as a perpetual thing.
Were the
And
Levites
so
the caregivers?
that may have been added to the fact that they thought, well, we're Levites too, we're of the tribe of Levi as well. But
Were Levites given the care of the tabernacle and the stuff? What were their duties? Just the Levites, other guys.
Some of them like sang, for instance, right? They were part of a chorus in the temple. And
Yeah, I don't know.
housekeeping, or tabernacle keeping.
Yeah. So they'd have access to the censers and the incense, and they'd know where that stuff is.
But it says here also, you have gone too far, sons of Levi. So they overstepped their bounds somehow.
well,
Trying to take the priesthood.
by trying to take the priesthood and rising up against Moses,
Okay.
God's call, and Aaron.
So the censers were probably holy, the men not
The air
so
holes,
much.
right.
Well, we don't know whether they went and had censers made, to bring before the Lord. It doesn't tell us that they went and got these censers that were for Aaron and them and his sons. It doesn't tell us that. It just tells us that they brought censers before the Lord.
Okay.
And so, but back to the point of, that we made last week, they were children of God. They were believers. And so it's just amazing to me that, yes, God judged them by taking their lives, but he makes a memorial out of this, a reminder for everybody, not only just to do that, but just to think that, as you guys are bringing out, that what they offered was now holy unto the Lord, and he made it a part of the tabernacle. He literally made it a part. I mean, to me, it is just overwhelming that precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. He's the one. He is the fire that consumed them, and yet he wasn't. He loved them in bringing down perfect judgment upon them, and loved all the congregation by bringing perfect judgment down upon them. And so all that is expressed here to me, and even emphasized in the fact that he now used those censers, melted them down, and made them a part of the tabernacle itself. Like just demonstrating just how close and how much he loved them. And not just them, but the whole congregation as well. Anybody else thoughts to that end? His judgments are true and righteous. And so, it's meant for us to know him better. It's meant for us to understand his holiness in a deeper way when we contemplate these things and when we see how he carries these things out. They took too much upon them. They overstepped their bounds. They sinned, as it says, against the Lord. That's who they were really rising up against. It was his decision to call Moses and to call Aaron to those. And that's the thing for us. A pastor that is called to be a pastor is really, although we as a church we may say we call a pastor, but a pastor should be called of the Lord to be a pastor. And I'm not saying that the church or a group of individuals can't confirm his calling to minister to them, but nonetheless, that calling should be of the Lord. And does that make them better than me or you?
Different role.
Just a different role. Not better, but a role that you need to respect and that you need to honor in that position of authority. But it doesn't make them better than us, and that's the way it seems as though Korah and his company were feeling. Like, they're better than us, and it ain't so. And so we don't want it to be so, so, we want to share in all of that as well. You can't share in something that the Lord has not called you to. He doesn't intend for you to share in it. He intends for you to be benefited by it, but he doesn't intend for you to everybody to have the exact same call upon their life. Yes, generally speaking in many ways, but not specifically. Any other thoughts? With this, he ends up by saying that this would be a memorial unto the children of Israel, that no stranger which is not of the seed of Aaron come near to offer incense before the Lord, that you be not like Korah and his company, and as the Lord said to him by the hand of Moses. So, was this meant for their good? A memorial is something to remember. It's something to appreciate. It's something to be thankful for. It's something really to rejoice in. And yes, it has its solemn part of it as well, but it's meant to motivate us. Memorial Day it has a solemn part of it, but it is meant for us to appreciate and live in the light of those that gave their lives for us. And so it has all that benefit. And did they receive that benefit is the question. Did the children of Israel receive that benefit? Well, let's read on and find out. But on the morrow, when is the morrow? It's the next day. But on the morrow, all the congregation of the children of Israel did what?
Complained.
All the congregation. I'm not saying that I'm better than they are. I'm not. But yet at the same time, doesn't it seem overwhelmingly almost impossible for this to be the case? Anybody else think that way, feel that way? But it wasn't. It says, they murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, ye have killed the people of the Lord. And it came to pass when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, that they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Talked about that earlier. And Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of the congregation, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, get you up from among this congregation. Hey, they've had this conversation quite a number of times already. And he says, get you up. You know how you told everybody to get away from Korah and all of them? You get away from this whole congregation. He says, that I may consume them as in a moment. And they fell upon their faces. Moses and Aaron fall upon their faces. And then Moses realized what was happening. So Moses says unto Aaron, take a censer and put fire therein from off the altar, and put on incense, and go quickly unto the congregation, and make an atonement for them. For there is wrath gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun. And Aaron took, as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation, and behold, the plague was begun among the people. And he put on incense and made an atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living. And the plague was stayed. Now they that died in the plague were 14,700. Besides them that died about the matter of Korah. And Aaron returned unto Moses unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the plague was stayed. You can't hardly read it without getting chills with thoughts.
You wonder why they wanted to. They were given a position, a job, but it wasn't enough for them. Or they felt Moses and Aaron weren't doing enough. It's kind of tossed back and forth, but God was righteous, so there had to be a warning there.
I think he's warned them and 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 warned them.
You wonder how big that plate was when they hammered it out. This big, or was it this big? Because it had to be part of the congregation, so it had to be holy. But their misuse of that holiness, or overstepping their bounds.
To me, I mean, this just speaks what we've said over and over and over of the bondage that they were in. These were believers who were in bondage. They were no longer in bondage in Egypt, but they were still in the bondages of Egypt, of worldly, carnal, of ungodly thinking. I'm not sure exactly. I didn't look up to see where this falls in the scheme of things as far as when the golden calf was made. But to turn to the gods of Egypt, to turn back to the gods of Egypt as believers, to have such wrong, lustful, fornicating, idolatrous thinking. They were in bondage. They were God's people, but they were in bondage. Because if you weren't in bondage, you wouldn't keep doing these things. You wouldn't keep doing these things.
Well, and as Moses and Aaron, when, talk about warning, when the Lord said, get up from among the congregation, I may consume them, they hit the dirt, and Moses said to Aaron, take a censer, put a fire there from the altar, get the incense, and go quickly to the congregation. It's kind of like, this is what's coming down.
But
They
you see
knew.
what happens here? Moses becomes the mediator between the people and God.
Oh, yeah.
Again,
He stepped
Yes.
in.
Yes.
He stepped in
Begging.
between them
Yeah.
again to save them.
yes.
Because Moses and Aaron were not in the bondage that the congregation was in. They were seeing things clearly. So when they saw what the congregation was doing, they thought, oh no, here it comes again.
Yeah. And ultimately, it happened enough times. Moses went there enough times as the mediator, as you said, Max. He went there, but even it was getting to him. And that's what ultimately kept him from going into the promised land. Because he went there as a mediator, 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 but he got fed up, and he got angry, with them. And so...
And that's why Jesus is better. He's our better mediator.
Yes, fortunately, the perfect one. And so, again, it's like all this judgment is coming down. I mean, literally, you go back to when he gave them the 10 Commandments. He told them to sanctify themselves unto the third day, to spend 3 days fasting and praying before me, to get freed of this bondage that you are in. And that's what he's been encouraging them strongly to do time and time and time and time again. And Moses has been that mediator to give them another opportunity and another opportunity and another opportunity. But ultimately, did they heed? No, they didn't. And they didn't go into the promised land because they refused to humble themselves before the Lord, because they refused to trust him to free them of those bondages. And so, yet God was perfectly righteous and perfectly just, and brought down perfect judgment all along this way, all along the time. Well, why do I forget how they could have been, as far as distance, in the promised land in a short amount of time.
Right.
In a short amount of time. Why was God leading them around in the wilderness? To prepare them to go into the promised land, to free them of those bondages so they could go in and enjoy and stay in the land. Because he knew if they went in the land, if that whole congregation went into land with those bondages, it was going to be a very short amount of time that they were going to enjoy that promised land before he brought in the curse upon them. And so he's preparing them. He's working with them. He loves them. He's discipling them. He's giving them every opportunity. We look at it as terrible judgment, but in reality, this is tremendous mercy with perfect judgment and discernment being carried out of the Lord. And so, any other thoughts?
guess when you were reading it, I was just thinking like how the church today, like, I don't know, I can't say the church worldwide, but for sure, Western civilization, church, I think we've been in way worse than these people in 14,007. And then I kind of like wonder what have I not rightly thought about, maybe in pertaining to what God has really done among believers.
Yeah, because he hates all these things just as much today as he did back then. And yes, fornication, idolatry, adulteress, abusers of themselves with mankind is all a part of the church today. Worship that divides instead of unites. Worship in quotes. Immaturity within the congregation and worldliness within the church as a whole. It's come about gradual, and it's literally like, the frog in the frying pan, you know what I mean? It's come about gradual, and we've accepted more and more worldliness, more and more things that God hates, and it's just now the norm. And so, may the Lord open our eyes to see that reality and come out from among them and be separate. Brad.
It just kind of struck me as you kind of detailed out, God's interaction with the children of Israel and everything. It's like, it seems like God blesses and God judges from a generational perspective so much of the time. Like, he was withholding judgment, from the children of Israel because of, Moses and Aaron, right? Like, so they were receiving mercy because somebody was, as Max said, was standing in the gap, right? And I see Moses, I don't know for a fact, but he was probably the generation before. A good population of the children of Israel, I assume, were probably younger than him. But that's an assumption. But what I'm saying is their mercy came because God chose to focus on Moses and Aaron. And, I know blessings I receive have nothing to do with me whatsoever. It's because of you and Mom. And I know there's blessings that you and Mom received that had nothing to do with you, but it was because of your parents. And it's, it's like so important that you can withhold judgment from future generations, and you can provide blessing for future generations just by seeking the Lord with your whole heart, and you can provide mercy for future generations like Moses did, Through Moses, mercy was shown to those who actually did walk into the promised land, and it's just like, it's so important. I think the children of Israel, the ones that ended up not going in the promised land, they were solely focused on themselves and their own little world, their own generation, and they got withheld from one of the biggest blessings because of their singular focus. But Moses, I think, saw the generational picture of it, and that's why he kept on going to bat for them, because he saw 200, 300, 400 years from now, God's chosen people. And that's why if Moses was just like, oh, whatever, but no, he saw that generational mindset, and that's why he kept on saying, no, Lord, don't do it. No, Lord, don't do it. You know? And it's just, I think, I agree with Lorelai's assessment of the church today, Western church of the day. I think the modern church has been spared a lot of judgment because of the generations in the 40s and 50s that were, big movers.
Yes.
We're being blessed because of those generations, 80 years ago. So it's just like,
Yeah, so important to see in both directions. You're describing them seeing future generations. Well, they were just as Moses knew that he was called because of God's promise to Abraham, and that, again, like you said, blessing. Well, why did they end up in Egypt? For God to bless them and take care of them and provide all their needs. And then they turn away from him and become slaves in Egypt and the bondage and everything else. And again, what? He looks down and he hears their cries. And he comes to deliver them and, chooses Moses to do that. And so God wanted to deliver them. Not just deliver them out of Egypt, but he wanted to deliver them from Egypt within them. And so that's his goodness, that's his love, that's his mercy, that's his justness, that's everything about him. His salvation is eternal, and he wanted them experiencing that eternal salvation in every part of their being. And so that's what he's always bringing about for all his children, no matter where you're at on the scheme of things. Whether you've just been brought out of Egypt, or whether you're, wherever you're walking in the Lord, or whether you're in the promised land and enjoying all the benefits of it, his desire is for all of his children to experience his salvation. That helmet of salvation. We are to be strong in the Lord. We are to be strong in the understanding not only that he is our deliverer, not only that he has delivered us from the penalty of sin, but that he's in the process of delivering us from the power of sin, and that's his great salvation. And so to understand the greatness of his salvation, you need a broader perspective. You need to see it from his fullness, and that's what you were describing, and that's what they were certainly ignorant of, or were choosing not to look at, and choosing not to get to know their God. He made known his ways, the way of deliverance, the way of judgment, the way of mercy. He made known his ways unto Moses, but they only looked at his acts. That's the way that they could turn around and say, you killed all these men. You killed all these people on the very next day. That's the only way. They had to be,
Tunnel vision.
Yeah, they had to have tunnel vision. They had to be just looking at one thing, at one act, and looking at who to blame, rather than looking at God in all his glory and in his fullness.
They never blamed themselves, though.
That really is the heart of it. That's where they didn't look.
Right. They didn't say, we were wrong here and we should repent.
Yes.
They just said, you killed them.
Yeah. They ran away, afraid that God was going to open up the earth everywhere and swallow them all. But they didn't, as you said, they didn't look at themselves, which is exactly what God was wanting them to do.
Don't we always do that, though?
Yes.
I wasn't speeding.
I was, but I have a good reason.
Right. You made me do it.
Yes, it is so easy for us to get centered on ourselves. And yeah, we struggle with that. But again, Satan's going to take us there. But again, are we freed from the bondages of Egypt, and are we helping each other? God did everything perfectly that he could do to free them. And they did not walk in that freedom.
It's like our song, Behold Our God. Aaron and Moses saw him for who he was, knew his words. In the Old Testament and in the New Testament, he came into his own and his own received him not. They did the same thing here. He's coming to us and we're receiving him not. It's the same thing for me, for the church, like Lorelei said. We're not receiving him for who he is. And why does it surprise us that the bondages remain?
And that just takes us back. Or anybody else?
How do you apply that ultimate church split that God had designed there to today?
Rephrase that?
Yeah.
Because God dealt directly with the one tribe of Israel,
Okay.
and then the 14,000 with the plague,
From the congregation.
which was from the congregation that were supposedly doing things right.
Oh no, the congregation wasn't doing
Apparently
anything
not.
right.
No.
They were all being led by these.
If there was only
250.
14,700 that died from the plague, that was like an infiltration of the ones that were.
It was going to
Supposedly
spread through the
following
entire
No,
congregation.
he was going to consume
plague
the
was gonna
entire
take out
congregation.
all
He
of
didn't
them.
choose just 14,700. If Aaron hadn't.
Yes.
If Moses ran slower, it was going to be 20,000.
Yes.
Exactly.
Or Aaron runs slower.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and
Yeah.
that's exactly. Had they not discerned it when they did discern it, and had they not moved quickly, the number would have been higher. And if he would have fell in a pit, it would have been them all.
It says
So-
the people of Israel grumbled against Moses, all the congregation. There wasn't one that
Yes.
said, hey, guys, we shouldn't do this. They
Yes,
all went with it
yes. It's
and blamed them
It's
for killing the
astounding.
250.
And in the face of death, bondage is so strong that in the face of death, if you don't humble yourself and repent, then you won't walk in the freedom of it. You just won't. But that's it's amazing. Dan, would you close us in word of prayer?
Lord, we thank and praise you for another wonderful time of fellowship and learning and of you speaking to us through your word and through the input of all the rest of us and what light you given to us. Thank you for this lesson to be learned about not questioning you and trusting you and recognizing your perfect judgment, and we pray that we would recognize your perfect judgment as we go throughout this week, and that you would bless the rest of our time of learning and fellowship the rest of this day. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.